let's start to talk about the content a little bit more. What is the goal of yoga? I have already alluded to this a little bit. Purusha Chit Viveka, disentanglement of consciousness from mind. So we think that what's happening, this activity that's coming from our mind, is us. But what yoga is teaching is that you've got something else. And I'll remind you of this. You have Mahat, you have Purusha, and you have Prakriti. As you remember, so actually forget about Mahat, but we don't have a direct experience of Mahat, but Mahat arises out of the combination of Purusha and Prakriti. Mahat is it's the universal intelligence. So like the thing that's making the wind blow behind my window over there, what we do have an experience of and really aware of is Buddhi. Buddhi is the thing that's allowing you to listen to this lecture right now. Buddhi, Ahankara and Manas, which form mind, are Prakriti. They're part of material nature. That is like that's what yoga and Sankhya teach us. That's why they're changing all the time. That's why they can be unreliable. Purusha, though, is totally reliable. It's constant. It never changes and it never goes away. And so yoga is trying to teach us how to discern the difference between Prakriti and Purusha, which you could say ultimately they're trying to get back to Purusha. I don't really like it when people say, oh, but Prakriti is bad, man. We need to just get back to Purusha, because sometimes it's interpreted that way. I don't think that anything is bad. Everything functions for its own self. And I know that yoga doesn't think that anything is bad. And one of the verses in the sutras says, the reason that Prakriti exists is to help us get back to Purusha. Like, in the same way that if you didn't have night, you wouldn't realize that day exists, or winter and summer and things like that, and good and evil. So, here you go. The intellect and the Purusha are totally different. This is from chapter 3. The intellect exists for the sake of Purusha, while Purusha exists for its own sake. So Purusha just sees and persists and perceives. But intellect exists so that Purusha can connect with the outside world. Not being able to tell the difference between those two things is why we actually experience anything and feel stuff and identify with our limited self. By samyama on this distinction, by meditating on this fact, you get to know Purusha. So you can experience consciousness, pure consciousness, which is eternal and, effulgent and maybe could be divine if you want. Talk more about divinity and things a little bit later. So it's kind of a very let's kind of unpick all of this. Let's make sense of it. That's what the goal of yoga is. So to that end, if the goal of yoga is telling the difference between your mind and your consciousness, we need to sort out the mind or make sense of the mind. Yoga, you've probably heard this. Yoga is chittavritti nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind or of the field of your being. Think of it like a lake that when it's very stormy, you can't see, when it's very windy and very choppy, you can't see to the bottom of the lake. But when the water is clear, you can see through. In the same way, maybe you've experienced this. And lately, my meditation practice is all about trying to work out what I really think and what I really feel. Or rather not work out, I try to quiet the mind and the body enough so that I can feel what I really feel and know what I really know. And because the more you're bubbling and thinking, the more we confuse ourselves. That's in terms of everyday life and everyday practice. But what Patanjali says, and this is what I mentioned before, is that he says, when you still your mind, once you've done that, when that's accomplished, the seer abides in its own true nature. The seer is another way of describing Purusha. Purusha being the seer, consciousness, and prakriti, created world, nature, being the seen, the things that you see. When the mind is not still, the seer is absorbed in the changing states of the mind. So the consciousness, or rather the mind, the consciousness kind of takes on the nature of what it sees. And so you can't tell the difference between it. And so we have these chittavritti. This is very like kind of central to the Yoga Sutra, the teaching. And you'll maybe have heard people talk about this in like regular classes. The chittavritti are, you could think of it as like the fluctuations of your mind, or the changing in the field of your being, you know, of like feeling different every day, or like thinking something this way, and like confusing thoughts and things bashing into each other, and like, oh my God, all that stuff. Changing states of mind are the chittavritti. And what potentially points out here, he doesn't say that they're all bad. He doesn't say that thinking is bad. He says the changing states of the mind are either detrimental or non-detrimental to the practice of yoga. That is, some types of thinking can help you move forward, and some types of thinking are not so helpful and pull you back. Does this sound familiar? It's so realistic. Like, I really like it because it's so down to earth and it's so realistic, and he doesn't idealize things. He's like, this is it. You're a human. You have thoughts. Sometimes your thoughts are kind of going to help you do what you need to do, and sometimes not. So, and this is us leaping from the beginning of chapter 1 all the way to the end of chapter 3. Patanjali says, when the purity of the intellect, when it's as pure, when the lake is totally clear, then you achieve kaivalya, which is liberation. Kaivalya is aloneness, where the consciousness is kind of recedes away from all of prakriti and stuff like that, and you kind of rise above it, and you can just see everything, and you're infinite, which is great. But it's maybe not, as I say, the goal of the modern practitioner. Certainly, I am still interested in participating in the material world, but doing that in a skillful way, and certainly learning more about consciousness, but not yet. I'm not up for kaivalya yet. That's not me. If it's you, I'm really interested to hear that. But just so you know, that's what the text is working towards. The way that I'm presenting this lecture, in terms of what the Yoga Sutra does, is it follows what Patanjali does. He tells us, okay, that's the goal. Now, what's the problem? What's stopping us from achieving that goal? And he actually lists loads of things like sweating and laziness, and you know, there's many kind of obstacles and disturbances which he describes. It's a really like, it's a catalogue of human strengths and failings. It's very realistic and very down to earth. I'm not going to go into all of them here, but I'm going to talk about the main problems that he identifies. He identifies problems, then he identifies solutions, things to do, which is why it's so useful. So let's look at it. What's the problem? As I said before, the problem is thinking that your material nature and is your consciousness. So you look at your mind and you're like, oh, I'm conscious. But you can't see through the messiness of your everyday reality to the purity of your seer, because all of this is so messy. And the thing that keeps us entangled in the material reality is called avidya, ignorance, which is the inability to perceive the eternal part of you, which is something that we all do. And I'm going to read from Donna Farhi's lovely book, Bringing Yoga to Life, because she really grounds this. She grounds these quite, sometimes it seems esoteric, these teachings, in like everyday experience. Descriptions of the enlightened state abound in spiritual literature. And as resplendent and inspiring as these descriptions are, when we're drowning, like when life is bad, they're about as useful as a swimming manual. Again, it's like David Gordon White's combustion engine metaphor. What we need at these moments is something that can help us get our head above water. Patanjali tells us we are drowning because of one fundamental misunderstanding. We fail to see who we are, so we live in a state of mistaken identity. As with a character in a comedic drama, our life as an imposter becomes even more entangled and complicated until we're able to realize and live as our true identity. We're not an island unto ourselves, but inextricably linked to everyone and everything. So, have you ever felt like you don't know where you're going, or like you are acting against your own best interests, or you seem to be going round and round in circles all the time? Oh, I certainly have. It's this confusion which arises out of avidya, which is not being able to see clearly. And Patanjali, when you're walking around in these circles and you don't know what you're doing, when people are talking to you about the purity of consciousness, you're like, what is that? And so Patanjali breaks it down all the way to the basis. Our false understanding, avidya, is mediated through a turbulent and confused mind. In order to balance this, we need to look at the rules of the mind in order to achieve our soteriological goals, so achieve liberation or becoming free. If not free from prakriti, then free from our misery or our confusion or our angst. And what Patanjali gives us in the text is rules of the mind, or not exactly rules, but I like to think of it as a map of consciousness. Like, be like, you're human. This is like why you feel nuts, because these are the things that your mind is doing. And when we actually look at it, it's very recognizable. I like to say yoga practice is the art of becoming aware of our blind spots, because we tread the same paths again and again and again. And so we can't see the fullness of what our mind is. And Patanjali is like, look, here over there, that's that thing that you do. And you're like, oh, right, great. It's a mirror.